Today has been a calm day. There haven't been any particularly notable political events today. The scandals from last week are still ongoing, related to the aftermath of the bombing of Iran's nuclear program. President Trump and the legacy media continue to argue about the results and how successful they actually were. In Europe, the NATO summit has concluded, and as a result, the member countries decided to increase funding for defense programs. And that's basically it. There are no changes observed on the fronts of the Ukrainian-Russian war. The front lines are practically not moving. So, I decided to dig a little deeper and tell you about the history of nuclear projects and to what extent what the media tells us today actually matches reality, because that's the main narrative in today's media. So, let's dive a little into history. The possibility of creating an atomic bomb was assessed as feasible in the late 1930s. At that time, there was a group of people in the world that consisted of about 24 individuals. In other words, there weren't many people on the planet who knew what an atomic bomb was or how it could even be made. Nuclear physics was just emerging. That whole period is shrouded in secrecy and darkness, because these were classified projects, and no one wanted to reveal, for example, what Germany and Japan were working on or how their projects were developing. The possibility of creating an atomic bomb became apparent after the discovery of spontaneous uranium nucleus fission in Germany, by the way, at the end of the 1930s. However, as we know, a heavy water production plant was built in Norway in the early 1930s. The company Norsk built a plant for producing heavy water. This heavy water had no technical application in industry or in everyday life. It couldn't be used anywhere except in the nuclear industry, which officially did not exist at that time. After that, each country conducted its own research, with its own specialists trying to accomplish something. As we know, America created its Manhattan Project, which gathered together all possible options for developing this situation. And at that time, it was already obvious. Already in the early 1940s, it was clear that there could be two types of nuclear explosive devices. One is an atomic bomb made from uranium-235, and the other is an atomic bomb made from plutonium. These two elements, uranium-235 and plutonium-239, were considered the main components of nuclear weapons at that time. Both engineers and scientists around the world began developing technologies and methods for obtaining these elements. And as it turned out, the process of extracting and producing these elements is significantly different. It is very expensive and resource intensive, and from the scattered information we have, we can see how it happened. The most complete picture is found in American history, the history of the Manhattan Project, which was led by General Leslie Groves. But as for how it happened, for example, in Nazi Germany, we don't know for sure. We only know that this project existed, and now I'm going to tell you about it. In America, they decided to pursue two approaches at once when creating the atomic bomb, to develop both a uranium bomb and a plutonium bomb. To create a uranium bomb, isotope separation was required. From natural uranium-238, the isotope uranium-235 was separated out, a lighter isotope, and its mass content in natural uranium was only 0.7%. It was impossible to separate it by chemical means, because it's the same chemical element, just different isotopes. And for this, technological facilities and processes were created that made it possible to separate these isotopes. But the problem was that these facilities and the isotope itself, all these industrial facilities, turned out to be enormous in scale. Several methods were used to separate uranium isotopes. Well, first and foremost, there was the gaseous diffusion method. There's also the method of separation using so-called calatrons, developed by the California Institute of Technology. And so, within the framework of the Manhattan Project, enriched uranium, uranium-235, was produced. This is what people talk about in connection with the Iranian nuclear program, that Iran is enriching uranium and extracting uranium-235 from natural uranium. Centrifuges are needed for this. In the Manhattan Project, centrifuges were not used. A different technology was employed. It was a three-stage process. It was a very expensive production. Just one of the plants, the gaseous diffusion complex, cost $500 million in those dollars. So this was a colossal project. At the same time, in Nazi Germany, there were also attempts to separate uranium into isotopes. And for this purpose, there was a research institute headed by Baron Manfred von Ardenne, who was developing centrifuges and proposed to separate isotopes using the centrifuge method. This method was later used in the Soviet Union, because after the war, Manfred von Ardenne moved to the Soviet Union and worked for Stalin for the Soviet nuclear program. His specialists created centrifuges, and it turned out to be a cheaper method. This same method is used by Iran today. In other words, this is a method that was developed 80 years ago. There's nothing modern about it. In Germany, this was the main direction of research, but again, it was probably not very successful. And as a result of all the attempts by humanity, by all countries, the Soviet Union, the United States, Germany, and even Japan, which also tried to separate isotopes. As a result of all this activity, only one uranium bomb was ever assembled and used. Throughout the entire history of humanity, only one uranium bomb has ever been used. This is the bomb that was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima in August of 1945. Neither before nor after that has humanity ever produced another uranium bomb. Why? Because, on the one hand, it was extremely expensive. On the other hand, the power of a uranium bomb cannot be controlled. It can only be around 20 kilotons in TNT equivalent. You can't increase it, and you can't decrease it. So what is that? That's inconvenient for the military, because as we know, nowadays charges of completely different yields are used, from 1 kiloton or even half a kiloton in TNT equivalent, up to millions of tons, up to megatons. The other path that existed, and it was the main one, and apparently this was already clear in the early 40s, but history hides this from us. This is the creation of the plutonium bomb. Plutonium is a synthetic element. It is practically unavailable in nature, but it is produced in reactors from uranium-238, from natural uranium, as a result of irradiating natural uranium with a stream of neutrons. Thus, in all countries, in the United States as part of the Manhattan Project, in Nazi Germany, in Japan, and in the Soviet Union, reactors began to be built. The first successfully functioning reactor was built at the University of Chicago, under the stands of their stadium. It was called the Chicago Pile. This was a tremendous success. It started operating in February of 1942. Now, it might seem as if it was an energy reactor. Its energy output exceeded the energy input. In other words, it began to produce energy, and that was a success. In reality, the purpose of this reactor was to irradiate natural uranium in order to convert it into plutonium-239. It was a very simple reactor. It was basically just a pile of high-purity graphite assembled under the stadium bleachers. This was very high-quality graphite, into which rods of uranium, natural uranium, were embedded. In this way, they approached critical mass, and a chain reaction began, which was controlled. In this way, the neutron flux allowed them to irradiate the same uranium that the reactor operated on, and then chemically extract plutonium from the irradiated uranium, which is necessary for making a nuclear bomb. This method is much cheaper than building all those giant facilities for separating uranium-235 isotopes. And this is a method that allows. Plutonium is a material that is convenient for weapon production. You can make bombs of any yield from it, because it can be used for low-yield bombs, and it can also serve as a trigger for thermonuclear bombs, which run on hydrogen and lithium, that is, on tritium and deuterium. Fusion reactions. That's already a thermonuclear reaction. There, a plutonium charge is also used to initiate the thermonuclear fusion reaction. And this is cheaper than producing uranium-235. As a result, over these 80 years that humanity has possessed nuclear weapons, almost all of the weapons are plutonium-based. Well, of course, there have been experiments with other types, not necessarily uranium and plutonium. There were other types of bombs, but they didn't prove to be as effective. As a result, uranium is not the main material for producing nuclear weapons. Of course, you can make a bomb out of it, but first of all, it's incredibly expensive. Secondly, this is a technology that became understood more than 80 years ago, and it's inefficient. So now they're trying to tell us that Iran was following this path. But in reality, it's not that simple. Listen further. Specialists in Germany in the early 1940s also understood that there were two ways to develop nuclear weapons. That's a nuclear bomb made from uranium-235 and a nuclear bomb made from plutonium. And in Germany, they tried to build a reactor to produce plutonium for weapons. However, Western intelligence agencies, the intelligence services of the United States and the United Kingdom, did everything they could to prevent this. Reactors for producing plutonium generally come in two types. You need a moderator there, a neutron moderator, and for that, either very pure graphite is used, as was done in Chicago as part of the American nuclear project, or you need heavy water. This is water made from a heavier isotope of hydrogen, deuterium, and it also serves as an excellent moderator. In such a reactor, when natural uranium is placed into this heavy water, a chain reaction begins and neutron irradiation occurs. And in this way, natural uranium breaks down into plutonium and a number of other elements, which are then separated by chemical means. So, the Norwegian heavy water plant was blown up by British special forces. But when it comes to graphite as a moderator, that's a very murky story. It turned out that they couldn't produce graphite pure enough. They needed very pure, high-quality graphite. And so, the German project stalled. But the project to obtain uranium-235 continued. And so, Baron von Ardenne was building these centrifuges. They tried to separate something. Apparently, they managed to achieve something. But Germany couldn't make a plutonium bomb for technological reasons, even though they understood how to do it. So they pursued the uranium bomb using uranium-235, simply because they had the technological capability for that. The United States, and later the Soviet Union and all other countries, had the technological capability to produce heavy water and ultra-pure graphite, and they did so. And as we know, plutonium production reached an industrial scale. The second bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. Moreover, before that, there was a test explosion of a bomb called Gadget in New Mexico, which was successful. Since then, all bombs have been plutonium-based. What's interesting about all this is that today the media is trying to convince us that Iran is attempting to make a uranium bomb. Iran is trying to gather enriched uranium, uranium-235, to create nuclear weapons. There are advanced physicists in Iran. They fully understand and know the history that I just told you. So why is Iran spending billions of dollars on a program that really doesn't match the current realities of nuclear weapons production at all? That's a very big question. After all, no one tells us or explains. Where in Iran was plutonium produced? Was it even produced at all? As far as I know, there was one place in Iran where plutonium was produced. That was the IR-40 reactor. It's a heavy water reactor. They had a heavy water production facility, enough heavy water for that reactor to operate. And as far as I know, it was struck during an Israeli operation. The reactor itself was destroyed. We don't know anything about radioactive contamination, but there must be some, because it's impossible otherwise. It's like Chernobyl, obviously over there, but still, no one tells us anything. So apparently, there's a certain level of secrecy, and there's a kind of game being played by the press and politicians, who are trying to tell us that, well, 408 kilograms of highly enriched uranium-235 was taken out, hidden somewhere, and so on, and so on, and so on. But no one explains why we even need this uranium-235 in the first place. Of course, you could potentially make a bomb out of it, but it's not really bomb material. It's more for reactors, for other purposes. But what happened to the plutonium that Iran was producing? We don't hear anything at all about the plutonium. No one says a single word. And that's a really big mystery. Besides, I noticed there was an incident when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presented intelligence materials at a press conference, which showed that Iran was working on developing an atomic bomb. And among the blueprints he presented at that press conference were actually designs for a plutonium bomb, not a uranium one. Those are completely different things. But today, we aren't told anything about Iran having plutonium or trying to make a plutonium bomb. We don't know how much danger the world is in. But the press should pay attention to this, because uranium doesn't pose the same danger as plutonium. These things are absolutely incomparable. We need to find out what happened to the plutonium that Iran was producing. Otherwise, we don't know how successful the US military operation was in, first, destroying the underground facilities of Iran's nuclear program, So let's keep watching. Maybe something will come to light, and someday someone will tell us something. But as always, you know, this topic is shrouded in secrecy and darkness. No one tells the truth. Everything is super secret. And that's understandable, because the fate of all humanity depends on it. However, it's important to tell the truth. Humanity needs to know what's happening and be prepared for the consequences. Thank you all. Subscribe and hit the like button. Your support means a lot to us.